about 4 months ago. I went up to one of the sessions at Park, and Dan was the speaker. And when I sat there and listened and heard the presentation about how the world can evolve and how we can all work together more productively and use this network to make us effective, I just knew it was something that we wanted to talk about here. So I'm very happy that he was able to make it, and I give you Dan Rasmus.
Thank you very much. And since they're all over, I guess I should put a reminder of the question. Yeah, I came in from Southern California this morning, and this is a talk that kind of evolves over time, just like everything else that we do. I'll talk a little bit about evolution and adaptation as we go through this afternoon. If I can find the right button here to push and get my presentation going. Here we go. It's very interesting, as you know, Bill was talking about the internet and the hope that we had for connecting people. And recently there was a study done on the SARS virus that said AIDS took several years to figure out what the genome was and what the virus was that was actually involved in the disease, and SARS took about 6 weeks because of the connections between the labs. But what's interesting that's not told in that story, it's a great internet story because the information was being posted, it was very public, Centers for Disease Control and various research organizations throughout the country, but they were looking at each other. They were looking at each other all the time, and therefore trying to find information at places that they expected to find it. And that's great. I mean, that was very much an information sharing. What I'm going to talk about this evening is what happens when you don't know what information you're looking for. Because I do take all of the computer companies and most of the software companies to task. Because as we've evolved, and I have been doing this now since the pre-PC days, we were talking earlier about, I cut my teeth on Burroughs B17 and B1800s running MRP systems on 512K of RAM, back when we wrote phishing programs. We've done absolutely nothing to change the relationship between people and computers. Right? We have not given the computer extended capabilities for helping us manage our information. And I mean that on the interpersonal level. Right? So we have faster computers, different user interfaces, but they don't manage our information for us in terms of I just kind of submit something to the computer, it will self-organize it, put it in the right places, tell the right people about it. And now we're starting to see information management systems that are evolving in that arena. And what that brings to, and most of the time my audience is IT directors. And these are promises that IT directors and IT managers and CIOs make all the time. They want to provide the right information at the right time, the right place, the right person, the right form. And that's most charters from enterprise IT organizations have some form of that statement in their mission statement. They promise end users and promise the business units that that's what they're going to deliver. And they can't do it. Because what happens is they go out and they send armies of systems analysts or business analysts or whatever you want to call them into the field to figure out what people are going to need. And then they start doing things like this, right? They say, well, the way we're going to give you all the information is we're going to put it all on one screen, and everything you will ever need is all in one place. We tried to find the worst possible portal implementation we could find, and this was one of them. It was just, you know, there's too much stuff, and it actually scrolls off the bottom, as you can see, and there's more information there than you can imagine. And it's, you know, from the user interface side, because we have scroll bars, we can keep adding stuff to the bottom of web pages. And so we have everything we want right there, which then means we have to search through our content. And then we have to think about the question of the right time. How are people being presented with this information, and where do they want to be disturbed? Their morning commute, during a meeting, or watching soccer practice, right? Because we all have cell phones that now have either something from CDP, from Sprint, or GSM and GPRS from AT&T and Verizon and others. So we can get the internet and we can get pinged. I was standing in England. I went out and bought this phone because it was a world phone. So I'm standing in England and I'm getting a message that somebody wanted to join my Yahoo list, right, for instant messaging. I had been IMing somebody, and I guess I didn't log off all the way. It was back to being a regular cell phone, but then I got a message saying that somebody wanted to join my Yahoo friends list. So we see that you know, these messages can be pervasive information, and requests can be interruptive in terms of how we manage our time. And then we have a question about who you are, right? I worked with Jonathan Penn, one of our analysts, and we came up with this list as being the places that you have an identity on the network in an enterprise. And so when the system is trying to figure out to tell you something that's going on, which you does it tell? Right? How are you logged in? Where are you? What information is it trying to do? What context are you in? And these are all the different places that your directory, your identity within the enterprise exists. And then you have the place, right? So as you're wandering around and you're doing various things, you also have the place that you are. And that is very closely related, of course, to time as well, because you may be commuting different places. But do you want the context of, I'm at a hotel on vacation, so I now have the combination of the wrong time and the wrong place, but yet somebody can invade that with the information that I want. Or am I sitting in a conference room and it looks at my calendar and decides what kind of project I'm working on and says, gee, we just made this, this agreement with somebody and here's the information and you've got the right stuff right there sitting in the meeting. That you may want it to do. This is me wandering around Colorado Springs last year at GigaWorld with a Zybernaut Poma. It's a Windows CE with a heads-up display. Very cool product. And then the right form, right? How do we get this stuff to people? Again, when we look at traditional systems analysis, a lot of stuff used to be on paper. And I remember working on a print reduction program at Hughes that saved $6 million. And what that $6 million savings did was fund our early internet research, right? Internal delivery of information. But we literally reduced paper, right? We took out forms, we renegotiated rates with data centers and all kinds of stuff. It was all paper-based. Systems analysts in the field walking up to report drops and saying, why isn't this report being picked up? Figuring out who it went to and figuring out what they did with it and if they needed it anymore. And one of the first projects we did was we would ask people, gee, what do you do with that? And they'd say, well, we open this up to page 47 and my manager is responsible for that department and I type these numbers into Excel and create a pie chart. That's all you do with this whole stack. That's all I do. And so we started delivering. One of our first things was we took data out of WSF2 on a mainframe, pumped it into OpenMDF services on the other side, and created an Excel spreadsheet that we then FTP'd down to a Novell server so that that person could open the spreadsheet and all they had to do was highlight the stuff and create a pie chart. Right, so we save that kind of stuff. But you know, it's the right, data comes in all kinds of forms, and as we move to various devices, what am I using right now? What's the context of the work? So context extends back into the device as well. So the other thing that happens when you're out in the systems analysis world is you're trying to guess what people are going to do. And that led us to role-based user interfaces, right? If you're doing a certain job, then you must need this kind of information. And what we find out is people are not doing the same jobs all the time. And we can't anticipate, because we live in a very chaotic world, what people are going to need moment to moment. So that led us to this thinking of adaptive workspaces. And what I mean by adaptive, and there are many kinds of adaptation in nature. I promised a couple people that I would show dinosaurs tonight, so here are the dinosaurs. They've recently discovered in China dinosaurs that for no good reason have feathers. Right? So there's this ongoing controversy, are birds dinosaurs? I personally believe they are. We can have a religious battle later. But I personally believe that dinosaurs are birds. But anyway, so they evolved feathers. They were not necessarily for flight. They don't know what they were for. Maybe display, maybe for insulation. But that's not the kind of adaptive that we're dealing with. And then wings with strange formatting. Wings were another adaptation, right? Once you had feathers, there were the ability to evolve flight characteristics, and some of the dinosaurs / birds figured out how to fly. But in the information space, it's much more moment to moment. It's the adaptation of the feather to the wind in the air that it's flowing through. We want to be able to have our information space deliver us the right kind of information in the context that we're working in. So user interfaces evolve from very generic, 3270 and let's see, what do I remember? ADM3A terminals and Tektronix green screens that couldn't do text, but they did great graphics. And that was the user interface, right? If we walked up to a PDP 1170, we had an ADM3A terminal sitting in front of it, and we didn't have much of a choice on what our user interface looked like. It was the same user interface for everybody, and we usually, if we did anything, we created some forms for somebody. And that was good enough for anybody who used it, the same forms for everybody. And then we decided that roles were something. People have certain jobs, and we could identify things with roles. And I remember going back, this is certainly a big issue in the portal world, continues to be the way people develop portals right now. I remember people creating role-based user interfaces in Office Vision and in All-in-One and HP Desk and other places where you could customize the environment and provide people with those kinds of interfaces. And then you kind of let them do this themselves, create their own interfaces. It was interesting, I was at a bank in the Midwest, and they were in the process of converting just 2 years ago from Office Vision, IBM's email and Office product, to Lotus Notes. And they had allowed high customization, and they were a little bit below budget, but they were looking at about 20-some thousand or more workflows and custom screens and forms and other things that they had allowed people to create over the years. And they were dealing with the issue of how do they convert all of that business knowledge into Lotus Notes, and then they also were trying to figure out what was relevant to them. Right? There was no context for all these business processes. They just existed. There was no version control. There was no ownership metadata. They were just, and they had to go around and look at each one of them and decide, who needed them, how often were they executed, and all that kind of stuff. So it was a very interesting customization issue. And then personalization. Let's take customization to the next level, which is will allow you to personalize the data that's in there as well and what you deliver through rules and other things. And we think the future is going to be the idea of adaptive workspaces. Right? How do we allow information to pick up clues from our environment? Yes?
What's the difference between customizable and personalized?
Customized is that I can change the widgets on the screen, and personalized is I can actually change the content and the logic behind the portlets.
One's a user interface layer and one's a deeper layer.
Right, one's a slightly deeper layer. You can customize, it's kind of, all of these go backwards, so I can customize, I can create a user interface with a personalized system that nobody could personalize. I could turn that feature off and it could look like a green screen if I wanted to. But yeah, that's personalizing the information as well. So the adaptive interfaces is, how do I get the information in the context that I'm working? How do I pick up the clues from my environment and use those clues to feed into the information space so that I can see the information? IBM is starting to move in the direction of what I call Uber personalization. And this is, see if we can get this thing to work. They have a number of different pieces, virtual teaming and awareness. What we find interesting, though, is as we look at all of these, and I'll use awareness as an example. And let's see if we can get the pen working here. Oops. Okay, 1 second. I love new technology. I'm learning before your eyes. Let's see.
This is the world we're going to.
This is the word. There we go. How about that? So this is Office 2003, which I just installed the second beta, so there were a few things that changed. And it was nice of Microsoft to actually go to a second beta. I think this is one of the few times that they've done that. So we may actually get code that works the first time they ship it as real code. I didn't say it, sorry for any Microsoft employees. But anyway, so the awareness piece is personal, your personal buddy list, friends list, depending on your instant messaging product. But these are trusted relationships that we build, right? This is, when I say personalization, they have decided that they want to put in an instant messaging piece through customization into their portal as an individual. And it's now personalized because it is only showing the buddies that are related to the trusted friend list that you have. So if you're running the full client or the same time, in this instance, the same time information inside the portlet, you get your personal list of names. It's not anything generic. That doesn't go far enough, because what we're saying, and we've challenged IBM very early on, that we need to get to the point of having personalized and context-based buddy lists, for instance, and that's one area, and we'll see a couple examples. But what that means is, if I'm in a call center and I've got a trouble ticket sitting on my screen, I want to know a couple of things that I cannot pre-program. Right? I want to know, and I may be able to do this piece, I want to know who were the last few people who talked to this customer on the phone. Because they're going to say, I called last Tuesday, and by God, I talked to somebody, and they promised me this was fixed. Right? So being able to see those names, have the awareness engine, pick up those names and put them in. Now, the trickier problem is analyzing the problem ticket itself. And there's now technology, and I'll show you an example in a moment. There's technology that will analyze in real time that content and then provide you a virtual list of names through, for instance, the instant messaging client of people who can help you solve that problem. They may not be people who had anything to do with this client before, but they're people who can connect to that kind of problem and help you work through it. And so we think that's the next level. Now, there's some prerequisites to that. All of this is built, and all of our, for the last 6 years now that I've been working at Giga/Forrester, has been on collaboration as the foundation for knowledge management. Right? There's all of this wonderful technology, repositories, knowledge management by a lot of places was, let's put everything in a repository, put a search engine on top of it, and thank you, we've done knowledge management now. Right? It does not connect people to the most important information resource, which are the people in the organization. Some people believe, and I think it's generally true, that about 80% of what an enterprise knows is in people's heads and is not ever written down by anybody. Most of the knowledge management conversations were around tacit versus explicit knowledge. Right? I look at tacit knowledge as things that will never be written down. Explicit knowledge is things that's written down, and we always forget implicit, which is what people try to do when they do knowledge management, is let's take that stuff that could be written down and get it written down and transfer implicit to explicit. The tacit stuff happens with collaboration. It's in the context of some interaction. You get a hold of somebody and say, gee, I've got this problem, let's walk through it. You may not have thought about it the way that you are thinking about it in that moment as that person's talking to you. So you could never write it down in that way. So the collaborative process is extremely important. And we've talked a long time about using content as a trigger for a conversation. But the technology is allowing us to analyze content and present collaborative opportunities to people. So this is using things like categorization, pattern recognition, semantic analysis, etc. And we believe that a new middleware layer is going to develop that will touch content, pre-digest it in various ways, and we don't have a platform yet that has all of these features in it. We're tracking about 50 companies right now that are in this space. Everybody from Autonomy and Verity to, I believe, Stratify either was or is across the street as I was driving down the street here. And a number of other companies that are doing pieces of this. Most of it is academic research turned into a business. So Mike Lynch went to Cambridge University in England, did a PhD thesis, and turned his company, actually multiple companies using that PhD work, eventually into autonomy. And their technology is one of the leading ones for doing this, and they just bought Virage this week. So they're now creating a larger platform which includes now audio and video storage and management along with their discovery technology. But they're creating to the user interface for this is the right content related to the work that you're doing, these are the right people you should be working with, and we see the technology already being picked up. So I'll do a little case study in a moment. This is Forward Learning Network, and I'll talk about them in more detail. But the idea is that we're picking up clues from the environment. And this is one of the tricky problems that still exists, but I think we can get around that early on. It is a little bit more explicit in terms of passing various parameters from a user interface back to the Intelligent Content Services engine and having it return. You'll see this kind of loop happening in several of the diagrams that I have. What Ford was dealing with was they had employees in their enterprise university that would take tests. And those tests would identify skill gaps between what that role of person needed to know and what they knew. And then they would sit down with their manager, and they would go through these reports. And we've all had managers, so we know that our managers are very diligent, read the reports that they're handed, and always give us very good mentoring and coaching, right? Everybody's had that great experience with their managers. What they found out was managers, of course, were not doing this. They were not consistently working with people, mentoring them, and saying, here's your curriculum. So what they ended up doing was creating a network that online gave them these tests, built the same kinds of assessments. What they did with the supervisor was it allowed them to decide that it was the skills that they needed. And this is not absolutely essential to the solution, but it's the process step that continues. It's actually Ford's chart. And then the system is handed off to, this is an autonomy example, handed off to the autonomy engine, where it is then matched, those skill gaps as concepts are matched against the available content on the network. They're presented with courses, they're presented with news information, they're presented with other forms of data that are going to help shore up their skill deficiencies. And so what they ended up doing was moving from the education profile into the business side to finding suggested content. So when they log into the learning portal, it is no longer the experience of, look at all the courses I could take. There are 2,700 courses on how to deal with customers better. I don't know which one to take. Right? So I've now narrowed down, taken these assessments, figured out exactly what I need, and the system is matching content both from courseware and other forms and giving me a personalized portal view that is based on the information. Yes?
Do we have a metric that tells us that this is successful?
Yes. I don't recall off the top of my head. It was something in the $20 million range in terms of both assess the cost avoidance kinds of things, where people were not skilled enough in their jobs, and by taking these courses as kind of more just in time, they were more available, as well as the administrative costs related to trying to get people to sign up for courses, right? So it was the skill, the improved intellectual capital of the company. They believe they put a dollar value on as well, because these people were not taking courses before, and there was an increase, several thousand more hits and interactions than they were having before they put this in. BAE University at British Aerospace, or what used to be British Aerospace, I'm doing a case study on them as well. That's much deeper than that. I mean, we're actually going to go in and take a look at what they're doing, and they've also estimated, using similar technology, several million dollars, I should say, of savings and opportunities, right? So one of the things we'll talk about in a moment is this technology is not just about productivity and efficiency. I take the software companies to task when they say, you know, Microsoft Office 2003 is going to make you more productive, as measured by what, right? But they also have the issue of that, you know, Microsoft and IBM and AOL and Netscape and others have very big soapboxes that people listen to. And productivity, to me, is not the right crux of the problem. The current economic situation has led us to productivity equals efficiency equals cost savings. What it does not do is help us figure out how to make our business better, right? How to grow the top line versus saving money on the bottom line. And I think we're missing some of those opportunities. And that's really where this technology plays in, is looking at opportunity cost. And I think that's some of what they're experiencing with these universities, is if we can have a smarter workforce, and it's less expensive to get us there, and we're presenting people with opportunities in the context of the kind of work. The next implementation of Ford is actually going to be looking at and profiling, and there's some personnel and privacy issues involved in this as well. And I'll talk about those a little later, but to touch on them, their next implementation is going to start looking at what did you do in the last 6 weeks, right? It's going to build this ongoing time-based profile of your work and add that as a clue into the search engine, so that when you go into the thing, it's not just what skills are you deficient at, because that's a very generic question. It's going to say, what skills are you deficient at in the context of the work that you're doing over the last 6 weeks?
Is this their appraisal?
What's that?
Is this their appraisal? Their
No,
work?
this is a way of actually narrowing down the presentation of information even more.
Okay.
Right, so that when you go to the portal, it's not just, you have these deficiencies, because they take a test once a year. And so you get this whole list of things, and there's no priority. So it helps prioritize based on the work that you're doing, prioritizing the presentation of the courses.
It seems to me,
Yes.
the way, suppose from the client side, the request came, and you have data in databases.
Yes.
I was assuming like your platform you're proposing is somehow has like a metadata base, which is going to store like an information particular profile
Correct.
or whatever.
Correct.
And based on that thing and based on the request came, you generate the query on the
Right.
fly and then query the database, get the data back, right?
Correct.
I was curious, like if that's the situation, then wouldn't the results you'll be getting or the content systems you are building, like the syndication, based on like what type of databases or like the systems that the search engine is going to the platform is going to support.
Right.
So aren't you basically restricting? I mean, like, because think like this. For example, you have a BA WebLogic application server, and then you store that information in Oracle database, just for
Right.
the sake of argument, And then on the other hand, like they have their own portal server. You can get the data from that particular system.
Right.
And then assume you have like some other system which has like SQL Server support, and then like it's like Microsoft, they build that particular portal on SharePoint.
Right,
So
right.
just for the sake of
Right,
argument,
right.
So you have that, and then like somewhere you have like SAP or like Sales for automation, like from Civil kind of thing. Now I'm assuming all those are like basically your potential content,
Right.
data resources.
Correct.
And from your like like if you have like Autonomy or Stratifier, whatever the product
Right.
you have, like for the end users, you're profiling all that data.
Yep.
From there, like how can you? I mean, like unless the system which is in the middle is going to support all these systems, then you're restricting the data you get back, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things. One is that what we're seeing now is a lot of these systems are built for-point solutions. So in the case of Ford, in the case of BAE, there are certain data sources, mostly unstructured content and courseware, that they point the engine at. Because the business decision was made that, for instance, if they're running SAP, the likelihood of SAP having something that's going to increase somebody's skill base is pretty small, right? We will talk about other instances where it's much broader, right? Where it is information, because that's really the end game, right? It's not just unstructured content, it's also structured content. It may also be tools. I mean, I've had some conversations with these companies as UDDI matures, and I've got metadata about tools. Could these kinds of algorithms also identify web services, for instance, that are available to you, saying, you're trying to solve this kind of problem, here's people who can help you with it, here's data that can help you with it, and by the way, here's some tools that may be able to help you with it. There are data analysis tools, and here's the kind of data I know that I'm suggesting to you, so these tools may be able to analyze the data that you're being presented with. But yeah, I mean, it is an issue in terms of the broadness of that. But that's a very different issue than trying to, if I go back to the original premise, which is trying to anticipate what people are going to need moment to moment. You can do at a pretty broad swath the various repositories and pick up the context of the work, and it may actually redirect the repository search, right? So it may pick up from my environment, I'm trying to do this kind of work, and oh, I'm not doing a generic query. I'm doing project management stuff around this project, and I may go out to the project database. I may go out to various other sources and do that. So yeah, there are things ongoing in the background that we'll have to manage. But I think this is very close. As I was chatting with one of the gentlemen about the interface between this and the autonomic and various other forms, organic computing and other terms that are used for the back-end data side, I think this is really the user interface delivery of those kinds of ideas, right? So if I can anticipate data center operations issues, disk drives full, disk drive failures and rollovers, and other kinds of networking issues and data center operations, this is the application of those same kind of ideas to the end user community, and eventually they're going to come together, right? So that the systems management stuff and the switching of databases and sources and all those kinds of things will happen. And I'll show you a picture a little later of some other thinking in that. This is a simple query. I'm trying to bug Autonomy to give me a better example. Because I think that, this is not showing them in their best light, but basically I'm showing a very small code fragment that picks up and parses various pieces of a website and presents that. They have a feature called active knowledge that if I'm reading a web page, a Word document, or whatever, it will analyze that in real time and present me with information that's relevant to that. So you can see that there's various at 87, 80% relevancy of these articles to the one that I'm reading. Right? One of the questions that came up today at Forrester in an inquiry, and I was working with Laura Ramos, our search and portal analyst on this, was people are buying Google. I don't know if we have anybody here from Google tonight. People are buying Google and wondering why it's not working in enterprise like it's working on the internet. Because everybody, right now, the feedback we're getting is everybody wants a Google-like search engine with those kinds of results inside the enterprise. And our analysis is that it's because of the massive information that's available on the internet and the organization of that information and the cross-referencing of that information, because as Google looks at the references between sites and how often they're cited is one of the ways that it elevates information. We don't do as much of that on intranets as people do on the internet. And so we don't see people using intranets in the same way. It's a different phenomenon inside than it is on the internet. And so the search engine that's built around the social phenomenon that exists and the massive information that exists on the internet, and the kind of social piece of people taking their own initiative to do that, they don't have that same kind of motivation inside of corporations. Some of them may, but we don't find that as a universal way. Intranets are much less organized, or too organized to the point you don't even need a search engine because they've categorized everything and you can find what is there, but the rest of the stuff is not as well organized. Therefore, those kinds of search engines don't work. This is the kind of stuff that we think we'll start getting around that, because you're now looking at pattern recognition, looking at a massive stuff, finding similar documents based on a plethora of algorithms, from Bayes to various state machines and neural networks and other things that are being used. We've also identified probably in the area of 20 to 25 different algorithms that various researchers have turned into technology that they've now commercialized. Some of it's very similar. Most of them use some form of Bayes that are doing some of this analysis, and then there's various differences in their approaches and various algorithms they've layered on top of that to try to make the accuracy better. But as we've read the academic research, we found that most of the researchers converge on the fact that none of these algorithms is that much better than the other one. And so what we're finding in the marketplace is that this is very much an emerging market, right? We don't have any vendor who has enough mass of technology, enough mass of market share that they can really dominate. So we're seeing companies look at this stuff and saying, gee, I want to take advantage of that. And doing so by doing their own analysis of what works best for them, and also things based on, does it talk to my repositories, does it interface with my portal, and those kinds of other business decisions that they have to make. Because eventually we do think this is going to become, as I said earlier, a middleware layer. Huge interest in this stuff in the U.S. government. I just did a piece on In-Q-Tel picking up and extending the tacit. They were an investor. I don't know if most of you probably know In-Q-Tel is the investment arm of the CIA, and they just extended their contract with Tacit Knowledge Systems to make the Tacit competency discovery engine available to multiple agencies. Autonomy was acquired very early on, prior to the formation of the Homeland Security Office by the Coast Guard, and it was then brought in through that realm.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
When you're talking about getting the data from the data sources,
Yeah.
For example, take Oracle database, which has some data inside it, and then if you use one of these search engines, they have their own neural networks or whatever the algorithm, right?
Yep.
When you generated the query from there and then fire the query to the SQL server, Oracle server or whatever, I was wondering because when you query the Oracle database, that query is being done by the Oracle server, right? So they have their own algorithms, right?
Right.
How this algorithm is going to get superimposed on the whatever data stores algorithm?
They index, primarily this is stuff in binary large objects that they're indexing. They're sending a query prior to, so they're doing record identification. So they're going in, if you're saying that this is an Oracle database dedicated to some kind of content. So the Oracle stuff is primarily metadata, and then there's a blob and or a pointer to a file. They analyze that stuff ahead of time and then take the record return so that when you're doing this matching, they're actually going directly to a record that says our previous analysis of this data is taking you to that record.
So is it fair to say in a crude manner, like, you know, I take all the existing data warehouse kind of thing,
Yeah.
and then this Stratify or whatever is like, and it's going to somehow some sort of like a wrapper API that can query the data warehouse.
Right. I mean, they essentially do both, right? They create and manage the metadata. One of the arguments in the industry is, do I touch the real data, right? Do I put metadata on the real data, or do I put it in a metadata catalog? And one of the other argument is, do I worry about metadata at all, right? And we'll see an example of some metadata issues in a moment. But you know, the question is, if I'm doing taxonomy, conceptual generation, metadata discovery, and then putting that onto the content, I have some very real issues about the interpretation of that metadata. Is that universally accepted? Is somebody looking for something and querying the metadata itself going to use those same terms and be able to identify it via the metadata that I have? Versus the approach with pattern recognition, which is I'm looking at this document and the entire scope of the document, and I'm creating a pattern out of that, and now I'm going and finding content that looks like that, but I haven't explicitly named it. Whenever we start naming things, we start getting into debates. You know, we were talking the other day about the differences between ontologies and taxonomies, and then I said, well, we have to talk about epistemology then. So, you know, we start dealing with, you know, kind of belief systems, and those are very difficult discussions to have within enterprises. You had a question there?
I just wanted to ask the gentleman to speak a little more clearly.
So let me explain this diagram before I go on. This was ASME Corporation put together based on QuickPlace, which is now the Lotus Team Environment or Team Workplace, I think it's called. They've rebranded them just in the last few weeks here. But what they do is you are given a task assignment, and it describes what somebody is asking you to do in the QuickPlace. They then go out and send that entire description of a task to the ASME engine, which then matches that up with people who are capable of helping you achieve that goal. And that then is put back into the QuickPlace so that you can see associated with, here's this assignment, by the way, here's a list of names of people who might be able to help you do that. And this is a code fragment that shows how they go about doing that. So it actually analyzes, let's see if we can make this happen here. Let's see. So it actually analyzes this task information and then gives you the results back of questions and answers that are in their database as well as people related to that. The reason I'm showing code fragments here is because when I gave this presentation at GigaWorld, in the conversation with the CIOs, what I wanted to talk about was very much that the user interface piece, the integration of this technology, is not that difficult. Right, so we are now at the point that these APIs are fairly easy to integrate with various kinds of existing technology. Right, there are no standards yet, so I can't plug and play them against different implementations, but I don't have a real difficult time because that's one of the issues that IT managers want to know. Right, do I have a huge investment to make in just getting this stuff to work and integrate it with the solution, or can I worry about the business side of it more and getting the right kind of data to people and putting it in the right place, and not so much about the IT? And I think we're at the point now that they don't have to worry as much about the IT piece of integrating some of these solutions, and they can deal much more with the business side. As I said, I'm using Microsoft Office 2003, and they have an interesting feature that they are now doing pattern recognition inside of Office 2003. They will read a Word document and relate that to, this is now RTC as we probably know, this is now, it's now an Office product, so this is something like Office RTC. They've rebranded their real-time communications and collaboration server as an Office product, and this shows the kind of integration that they have. They pick up material contributors. So if you can imagine opening a Microsoft Word document, it's a list of names. We've all seen that, you know. But that list of names that we're managing, if we try to pre-populate our instant messaging list with those names, we would end up with an unmanageable mess because we just have this huge list of potentially thousands of names. What they do is they look for material contributors, and they identify that as somebody who's a co-author, somebody who commented on something, or somebody who went in and modified a document. Right? So they pick up material contributors, and they create this list of members. These are members of that document's group of collaborators, right? It is in addition to your trusted list of names. These are the people who worked on this document. If I close this document and I open a new document, I'm going to get another member list based on the content that I'm using. Yes?
All that stuff travel every time the document's saved?
No, it's actually done in real time by Word, analyzing the document when you open it.
So it's coming from somewhere else.
No, the code is actually in Office. So they have done feature extraction, and there are smart tags inside of a document that identify names, and those are stored as data inside the Word document. But the material contributor is it's a special kind of smart tag that identifies that. So it's actually reading through the smart tags in a document when it opens it. Now, what happens though is it will shift. So if I'm a new person and I do this, it will then, and I do a comment or modify a piece of the document for the first time, it'll then change me from just doing feature extraction of I'm a person to I'm a material contributor now. Right? So the next person who opens it will then get my information.
What happens when you ship that document out as a contract? Do all those names go out too?
Yeah, yeah.
Ugh.
Well, it depends. I mean, you can scrub it.
I hope
right?
so.
If you send it out in a different form. You know, that's the same issue you have now. I mean, smart tags are in the current version of Office.
Right.
All of the comments, you know, from the collaboration standpoint, all of the comments, version control, and everything else. You know, what you want to do is accept all of the changes and then turn smart tagging off and other things that may scrub that document and/or save it in a different format. Right? These do not translate if you print it to PDF.
Okay.
So if you're doing contracts via PDF and you print it out that way, it's not an issue. But now, on the other hand, if you're talking about contracts, this is one of the big issues and big opportunity areas for business-to-business collaboration. I may want, right? I was working at a pharmaceutical company last week in New York that wanted this stuff to be left in because they were going to extend their real-time collaboration environment to include their partners, right? They were going to open up their firewall, invite their partners in, and when they gave them a contract, it was not a contract done, it was a collaborative document, right? So they wanted to be able to have them see these material contributors as well, right? So it's all about the intent of the document when you
See, the thing that's striking me is that there are a tremendous number of shortcuts that people take in the course of doing business.
Yep.
And this has a way of just exposing all those shortcuts, I think.
Yeah, well, and again, that's the if your intent is a true partnership with your business partners.
Well, that's fair. Yeah.
And I don't have my chart about the way the world has changed in this data set.
Yeah.
But the way the world has changed is that most of the time we have these hierarchical org charts, and we realize that that's not how we work. Right? We do not work through a hierarchy anymore. We work as a network. So people have different roles throughout the day, different teams that they work on, and the org chart usually does not extend to government, customers, business partners, etc. But when we work with those people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we have to realize and work them into our collaborative architecture so that we have ways of communicating with them. There are various approaches to that, right? So the pharmaceutical company I was working with is trying to figure out how do I extend my collaboration environment. I'm going to be the 800-pound gorilla. I'm going to specify that if you want to work with me, you're going to work with me my way, right? And a lot of large corporations have that feeling, right? When you're a medium-sized corporation and you're working with two large corporations, you have a big problem because you've got to then reconcile the architectures of this one wants me to do this, and another one's implementing a different technology. And so I've got to deal with those. And I warn the big companies about that all the time. You know, these are, you know, kind of the realities of business that we have to deal with. So there is the smart tag. So it actually identifies, this is in this case Rob Enderle, who some of you may know. He's one of the most quoted people in Silicon Valley, I'm told. I actually get calls, he's a fellow Giga analyst. I get calls from magazines and newspapers up here going, can you please give me a quote? I'm tired of talking to Rob. So this shows, you know, I can now set up meetings and mails and open his contact record and all this kind of stuff because it's parsed out through feature extraction that this is a person. Now, it's not perfect at that, right? Because it picks up, I also write poetry and I occasionally write literary criticism, and of course picks up when I'm writing about James Joyce and says, would you like to have a meeting with James Joyce, which we know is temporarily impossible.
But you would like to.
I would love to, but I don't have his phone number in Dublin, and I probably can figure out where he's located at the moment, though.
Hasn't changed.
Yeah, it doesn't change very often. We're trying, I've got to get somebody to channel, and I don't think we're channelers into the collaborative platform yet. Another product that I watch is Enfish, and what Enfish does, and some of you may have this, because this is all the stuff that you wonder why Microsoft didn't just put it in Outlook, right? This is, I'm looking at a contact, and look, here's all the email related to that contact, and that contact works for this company, and therefore I get information about that company over here. And for money, of course, this is the $99 personal version. For money, they will customize all this stuff so that you have different data sources, and it will also combine various queries. So right now, it's either company or person that it will go through and relate over here. You can get those combined if you pay money to them. They sell a portal as well. But they also then give you all the information that is related to your contact, the documents that reference them, the emails that are about them, and they give you, it's not shown on here, but they also give you relevancy so that you can see how relevant they are. And you can write sophisticated queries and shift between these various points in the environment. And again, that's very adaptive. What I think is interesting in their technology is also they're starting to apply this to the server. If I've got a piece of information, I go back to that challenge that I made about computers not performing information management tasks, right? I just did a piece on personal knowledge management tools, and I interviewed some of our clients and talked to them about what's bugging you about how computers work. And one of the things that came out on the personal knowledge management thing is I have to manage the organization of my files. And I've actually challenged, and I'll give you the challenge now, right? So you are now sitting at home with your file cabinet. You have multiple hanging folders and manila folders with various organization structure on them, and you have your home personal computer. What is the corollary? And I know there may be a few anal retentive people in here, but most of you probably are not. What is the corollary between the files on the computer and the files in the filing cabinet? You have completely different organization methods, although it's the same metaphor, right? It's a file cabinet. There are folders on the computer, either on the Mac or the PC, and you've organized your life differently electronically than you have in hard copy. And you probably have organized your home computer, your work files, and your home files all differently, right? And so you now have to remember the metadata, the organization structure, and the physical location of all the stuff you want to find, right? So, yes?
Well, partly that has to do with the physical context that the information is stored in. I'm not going to store the information in my filing cabinet the same way I store in the computer, because the computer medium is much more flexible than the physical.
Right, but there may be certain things, granted, I mean, if you have a list of photos, for instance, on the computer, you may not have a file for those photos. You may not have a photo file at home. But if you think about even taxes, you know, I've talked to some people about very specific things. You know, tax records, where I may have electronic tax records and I may have paper tax records, and they name the file folders differently, and they stick them under different hierarchies, et cetera. And yes, you can do a lot more with a computer in terms of moving stuff around. What you can't do with either one of them very well is cross-reference stuff, right? So I have to go out and create, if I want to cross-reference a piece of information, I have to create an alias or a shortcut and stick it into another folder so that when I open that folder I can see and click on that and it'll open the original document. And we don't do that very often. Now wouldn't it be nice, and this is one of the things that EnFish is doing, wouldn't it be nice if I automatically had cross-references made for me? So if I put something in a document, in a folder, it references that, has analyzed the content of the other folders on my system and or on the server. And think about if this extends to work groups, right? So I've got these community sites, it's analyzed the content in communities, created a context for the communities, and now I create a piece of content. It automatically then posts cross-references to various places around the network to here's a piece of information that you should know about. There are issues with privacy that have not yet been solved, but they are dealing with that on an enterprise level, and most enterprises say, you know, the stuff that's on our computers and our networks is ours. Yes?
There's a different issue, which is the model for the information structure. Cross-referencing is good if what you want is a link, a way of jumping sort of from one place to another.
Yep.
But if you don't have a more powerful file system model, then the problem with putting these things in all these multiple folders is the standard file system model isn't good at helping you organize,
Right.
except in a hierarchical way.
Right, right. And that's where the file systems, at least as I know it now, the file systems that we know and love are being rewritten to some degree
But
as well.
it isn't just that you need more information or linking of information. You need a structure in which to put it, and those things aren't around.
Right.
It's called an object.
Yeah.
What it is knowledge base is important because otherwise you have an explosion of terms that occurs. And by cross-referencing everything, what you end up is garbage in, garbage out, just much more garbage.
Yeah.
This is an old database problem. It's
Oh.
constantly being revisited.
Yep. No, but it's also, as I said, it's, you know, there's the information management side. There is some containment that can be had about this. But you know, one of the this is coming from the issues that we're seeing from end users of in giving feedback to the, you know, what's a priority at the R&D labs at various companies, right? So if I were to start with my chart about the information, and I did mention that, you know, 80% of the stuff that we have in our brains is never going to be digitized. Of the stuff that we've done, we spend a lot of our time dealing with transactional information because it's tractable, because we understand it, and that's where a lot of the R&D dollars go. So we look at something like 80% of our R&D and 80% of our IT budgets are spent on about 4% of our information, which is structured transaction stuff, because we understand that. And one of the things I'm trying to do with this conversation is get Microsoft, IBM, Oracle, and others to start having the conversations, which I realize I've done object-oriented databases and all kinds of other things in my past too, and AI and all kinds of things. And these are questions that keep coming up. But we don't have as many conversations. And even when I see the information visions from many of these vendors, it's not about the management of information, it's about the delivery of information. Right? How do I ping you wherever you are and connect you to the world? Great, I'm pinging too much now. I want to turn off my cell phone. Right? What I want to do is start having computers that are helping me manage the information. Right? So at the very personal level, if I'm dealing with this issue and dealing with cross-reference, I'm dealing with a finite set of information within my space, and I can probably get some value out of that. But I will see as this evolves where it takes us. Another thing that's adaptive, and this is probably a bit of a stretch, but this is instant messaging, where it's interpreting, it's got a database or something else behind it. It's actually using natural language processing to figure out what you're asking about and structuring that behind the scenes into a query and giving you information back about, in this case, an order and people who can help you do something. But we look at this information, this intelligent content services as being a very broad middleware layer where a lot of these technologies start residing. And we stop looking at them as point solutions to, gee, I have a natural language problem. Lots of the problems that we see could benefit from natural language capabilities. And shouldn't we have a natural language service that's available? shouldn't we have you know, an intelligent content service that provides pattern recognition, one that does rule bases? And I think as we move forward, we will see that evolve. And this is, you know, what we were debating just a moment ago. This is, you know, we want to see a change in the relationship between people and computers, right? Systems right now, as I stated earlier, are very much about doing I/O, executing applications, and managing that kind of environment. They're the exact same kinds of things that we did on 512K computers that we do now, right? They do those basic functions. They just take a lot more memory, a lot more horsepower to do the same thing. They are not adaptive. They do not understand their own environment that well, although we're starting to see, and this is where the autonomic computing kinds of work is looking at it from the server side, understanding the context. We need to do the same thing with information. Self-organizing, where it's collaborative, so it may actually involve us. If it doesn't know, it may involve us. And it's anticipatory, so that as we're doing our work, it's presenting us with information. Now, I do not mean this in the sense that our friend Clippy from Microsoft Office pops up in an annoying way and says, gee, I'm here to help you, I've got the right information, right? But as we look at what IBM is doing with their new workplace initiative, where we have a portal, and I think they're using, and I hate this, you know, they're using very general terms. I've got a focus of attention, right? So I've got a document, a Word document, an email document, some kind of transaction sitting in the middle of my portal, and all the other portals are related to that. So that when I'm reading that piece of content, the names of my instant messaging, the news that I'm getting, the other information in my environment is shifting to meet what I've decided is important to me at the moment. And you can also tune, you'll eventually be able to tune those parameters so that you can decide what kinds of notifications, for instance, you want. So you may have a notification panel and you say, if I'm managing my email box, and it can tell by how many clicks you're doing and if you're deleting and moving stuff around, it'll turn down the notifications so you don't get disturbed while you're doing that. Or if you're reading something, you can set up those parameters. But then there's a lot of things that come out of thinking about technology in this way. And I think that's really the challenge that we're making to the industry, that you need to think about technology in a different way than we have been. Yes?
I'm struggling to bring a point into, and I know it's something you've got within the context of what you're thinking about. I'm not sure I've heard it or digested it. We've talked about context relative to the tool set and technologies we use, but I'm trying to think of context from the standpoint of the process. Yep. Or the value of the activity that I'm going in. And let me just pick a concrete example, and then if you could sort of rip it apart and share your thinking with us on it. I'm a physician, for example, and rather than have the middleware be involved with every keystroke interaction, let's say that what I wanted is when I'm diagnosing you as a patient, I wanted to get involved and understand that the activity I'm engaged in right now is patient diagnosis, right. So that the intelligent content interaction understands that process context, and it's doing its filtering basis on how do you do diagnosis and certain AI and knowledge rules related to that, whereas this gentleman may not be a physician, he may be the chief administrator of the hospital, and he's doing some financial analysis now, in budget process, and so you're going to, as an intelligent agent, work with him with a whole different set of context rules.
Absolutely.
Could you talk about
that? The issue, when I go back to, that's picking up the clues from the environment, right? If I'm going into a portal that says patient diagnoses, you know, I'm in that process, right? So, you know, you've heard terms of contextual collaboration and other things, right? So I'm now in that process of diagnosing somebody. When I go into that screen, the services, the databases that are looked at, the other things, you know, I'm not going to go look at the, you know, Financial Times, for instance, and analyze stuff. If I'm doing competitive analysis from the financial world and trying to decide how hospitals are saving money, I may look at the FT and see what kind of articles people are writing about hospitals and cost savings, right? But if I'm diagnosing a patient, I'm not going to be looking at that stuff. I'm going to be looking at medical text and rule bases and other things that can help me do that diagnosis. It's going to know from the context of the work that you're doing, right? And it's picking up, and that's when I talk about in the IBM parlance that focus of attention, right? My attention is on this process of diagnosing a patient. The information sources that I have, the people that show up, because I think the instant messaging thing is one of the the best examples of that. If I'm doing this and I start narrowing down the diagnoses, I'm going to have the instant messaging list start showing people at the hospital who've dealt with that problem before, right? So that'll get populated, you know, and it'll get narrowed down. I mean, you could actually, I've seen some examples of this in call centers, is as you get the problem, the list of names and the instant messaging stuff gets shorter because there's more specialization, and it's finding the better matches for those people. So I think those, you know, that's how it will manifest itself. And it's really, you know, if you think about the kind of tabs across the top of a portal now, where you shift from, you know, my company, whatever I have, my HR stuff, my manufacturing, if I'm in manufacturing, my R&D views. I think this will be much more virtual. You won't necessarily have tabs that drive you there. Right now, we're actually coaching companies to build those tabs because that's the best way to get the clues, right? The adaptive stuff isn't working yet to its potential, so you have to build physical shifts in that change the attention, right? So if I'm looking at a manufacturing thing, I want to be able to, if I want to find human resources stuff, when I click on the tab at the top and shift from manufacturing to human resources, I'm now shifting my context, I'm shifting the databases that are being looked at, and then as I get more finite into the transaction that I'm doing, I'm going to get even more information, right? So if I go in and say, I want to change my, you know, I want to take vacation, so I go into the vacation form, it may automatically pop up a vacation policy, right? And other kinds of vacation facts and other things that are not physically linked via explicit links in HTML or XML. They're actually generated from the system saying these documents are the most relevant to the kind of task you're performing.
I'm wondering if you see this really predominantly appearing as separate products or services in terms of middleware and agents, or, you know, I'm reminded a little bit of the AI.
Yeah.
There's sort of this exciting opportunities with natural language and AI, and now they're all embedded.
Yeah.
You know, someone writes an MRP, and within it there's some smarts. If to take the doctor example, would it really be the case that 10 years from now, I as a physician at Kaiser would actually have an intelligent content meta layer that understands what I'm engaged in, or would my clinical system end up having that service now embedded within it, so when I'm interacting within that clinical system, it's
maybe
doing
both.
This internal piece.
Right, maybe both, because when we talk about generalizing, you know, there's always the difference between the general and the specific, right? So as we do day-to-day work, right, as we're doing content creation, content development, interaction and collaboration, there needs to be, I mean, one of the reasons that we also thought about this and why we talked about collaboration is that the collaboration vendors are having a problem trying to figure out how to get people to use their capabilities, right? So as I started off, you know, you've got these worldwide distributed organizations. How do I find the right people to work with? That's a very generic, horizontal problem that I can't deal with in a specific situation. I can, right? I can come up with solutions, as I showed right now. I can put in, ask me in QuickPlace, and boom, I've got some connection to people that I may not know, right? Wouldn't it be nice if that was a service and anywhere I had a collaborative opportunity, there was something like this Ask Me engine that was presenting me with people that I could work with if I wanted that, right? So those kinds of things I think are going to be generic. When I get down to somebody has invested money to build a specific database for diagnosing a patient or for doing hospital administration or something else, that may have a specialized engine in it. But I think there is going to be this horizontal middleware layer that has those capabilities. And also from the development standpoint, wouldn't it be nice if we had some capabilities that we could leverage so that we were not putting in a lot of individual technologies, you know, that we could build those solutions on top of a plumbing layer like we do with relational databases, right? So we build a lot of very specific solutions based on a generic technology. Wouldn't it be nice if the middleware layer were a little bit bigger than databases and networking protocols and had some of these other features in it, right? Does not get away from, there will be invention that will say, you know, whatever IBM, Microsoft, Oracle end up doing, and they put in this thing, some company has a great idea and revolutionizes something and it's not in there, and so I have to go buy that if I want that particular capability. That's, you know, that's the nature of the business we're in, or we all be sitting back with, you know, NEX and big HP calculators.
But what key issue right now with the integration of a lot of these technologies is that the cost of integration, to take a look at things like ERP systems, is needed. And as the complexities of collaboration increase, you have a combinatorial explosion in the number of possibilities. So unless you have some way of bringing it back down together, a lot of this stuff never gets deployed together in an economically effective form. And I guess the key thing I keep hearing over and over again is I keep hearing the rough edges grinding against the beautiful vision. And I hate to be the gentleman who points that out, but that's where a lot of there's very little money invested in research for those kinds of issues, if at all any.
Right.
And yet that's the thing that kind of gums up the works and keeps any of the ways that you could do this from really integration. So I'm not hearing that.
Right. Well, and that, as I said, that's one of the roles that I play, both from the R&D standpoint. I'm talking to software companies and I'm pointing those rough edges out to them. So I'm sitting at Microsoft and IBM and other places and saying, when you ask me why people aren't using collaboration, I'm telling you here's some issues. And by the way, when I'm walking in the labs, I'm not seeing people working on this. You need to work on this right now. And I'm also telling end user clients that, this is your end users are telling me, because IT sometimes is disconnected from the business, right? So I'm telling them for their end users, right? Your end users are telling me certain things. They don't know where to work. You've got too many collaboration products, right? I mean, I have multiple speeches that I can do. One of them is on the fact that companies have invested in too many collaboration options, right? They've got eRoom, OpenText, Microsoft Public Folders, Lotus Notes, intranets, et cetera, right? So they've got too much infrastructure and they haven't come to an architecture for collaboration, and we actually work through that with companies. But they're also not going back because they're dealing with these day-to-day technical issues and demanding that, gee, our end users are telling us that they have information management problems, right? And what happens is companies make an investment to deal with these problems. The rough edges right now are all dealt with people. Again, it's another presentation I have. But you are making an explicit decision as a business that when you have too many collaboration platforms, when you don't know what's going on in the organization, you're implicitly making the decision that you aren't going to be as efficient as you could be, right? You recognize that the enterprise is multinational, geographically distributed, and I don't have the best solution, right? You've decided not to buy something that's going to identify the people who could best connect. Even if it's only 10% of the time efficient, it's going to give you, pretty high returns and probably pay for itself, right? But you've decided not to do that. It's okay to do business the way we're doing it. We've done business this way, and it's okay to do that. And on the collaborative front, if you've got all these disconnected collaboration environments, you're explicitly paying for people to transport documents. Great, one of the big things and continues to be a strong selling item is supply chain management, right? People are still dealing with supply chain management. Most of the supply chain management things have collaboration built into them. And one of the behaviors that we see is, gee, I'm over here collaborating with my supply chain people, and I'm about to find out the factory's going to shut down. Hold on. Now I shift over here to tell the factory that they're about to shut down, and we have a collaborative conversation about what to do about that. Two different systems. I'm the conduit. I'm making the shift, right? I'm bringing the data from one place to another. Don't have integration, right? So there are rough edges. We do point them out. This one is just to kind of get your, consensus and or brains moving and saying, gee, should we do this kind of stuff, and having these kind of conversations. So, yes.
When I'm listening to the vision that's happening here, in my mind, it translates primarily as a company enterprise vision. I know that's not the limits of what you're thinking, though. Could you tell me a little bit how this changes when we start thinking about my interactions, not just being the team I work with in my company, but this whole world-connected internet, and how does that change things?
Well, the primary way, I mean, from the enterprise standpoint, we're talking about identifying partnerships, right? And as I said, the enterprises are now outside the boundaries of your hierarchy, which defines both who is in the company and the boundaries of the physicality of the company. Wherever those people are located is where the company is physically. Those boundaries are false, right? So one of the issues right? And it's not in my open issues list, but as we talked about the internationalization or the network capabilities, these are things that when we hinge on privacy, how much of this gets out, right? How much of this do you leverage, right? I could put these technologies on and apply these to MSN groups, right? I could analyze the content in MSN groups. I could analyze content in blogs and wikis and other places, do the same kind of technology around this, and we may very well see, because as I said, a lot of this is academic research that's been converted into commercialized product. We could certainly see some open source group decide that they're going to create, a naive Bayes enhanced, pattern recognition thing that goes out and reads blogs and suggests organization of blogs and gives you a customized portal based on that, right? That could happen.
I was wondering if that would sort of generate a natural tendency to an interface standard, much as we've seen in security and web services and things like this, so that your enterprise content engine can be able to reach out and tell Google or some service that you've perhaps contracted with, who's looking at the global internet, and say, I'm doing this content management internally. What do you know on this topic or subject?
Well, we see some of that already. RSS is a standard for news feeds, for instance, or for subscription services on the internet. So RSS is a standard. If I present my content as an RSS interface, I can actually subscribe to that content, and I can then mine it just like it's mined. The stuff that you saw with Enfish are RSS headlines coming in. So they're using the subscription service to manage that. So I can do that, right? What I can't do from the on is that I'm going to be able to leverage the world, right? And believe me, I've had conversations with the UN about this as well. Being able to leverage the world and say who out there is related to this kind of stuff. Now I can mine websites. I can subscribe to websites. I can bring websites in-house. I can do some of that information, right? As I said early on with the SARS stuff, right? They were looking at various places. They had people mining those pieces of pieces of content. They knew where to look, right? You could create a system that interfaced with those various places, create a standard for content, and make that even more efficient. But I don't see that happening in a broad sense, right? I see that happening kind of opportunistically.
So you see little niche communities that spawn that.
Yeah, and then from the, we've had long discussions with myself and with the content management group within Giga around the issue of what happens with interface standards. We are not dealing with standards in the same way on this kind of stuff as we have with email and other things, right? There's very few collaboration standards, there's very few content standards, right? We don't have standard. One of the fallacies of XML that we point out all the time is XML is an open standard, which means you can create standards in it, right? BizTalk is a standard, for instance, right? But it's the DTL, it's the definition of something written in XML. We don't have a standard for what a document is. We don't have a standard definition of metadata about a document. Always looks like this, right? And so, there are issues that continue to, that need to be dealt with. But from the standpoint, and that's if you're looking at the world becoming more explicit through the content, right? If you're trying to go back to that question of do I tag it or not tag it, if I'm looking at content standards, I'm now making the choice that I really want my content touched and I want those tags to reside with content. But all the stuff that's not tagged, right? I mean, that gives me a very limited view. If I've got a 500-page document and I've got, half a page of meta tags, there's a lot of information that I've decided is not useful. Right? The pattern recognition side of the world doesn't believe that. Right? They believe that the whole corpus of the document has a fingerprint, and I want to be able to match what's the closest fingerprint to the fingerprint that I'm looking at right now, and that may not have been picked up by the metadata and explicitly described in the terms that I'm using. I think going back to the the international side, I see this being right now very much focused on how does this apply to work, and it will be in, as I said, in niches perhaps that people may use other things. Let me just go through the open issues. I know we're running probably well past time.
You're okay.
I don't know what your time frame is.
We can't stay till tomorrow.
Okay. Context shifting. Trying to figure out where the clues are coming from, what you're working in, how to pick those up. I think that's an open issue that we have to deal with. Trust is an issue. I'll come back to that in a moment. You know, how do you trust people? How do you decide as you look at the development of kind of the openness of this stuff is about me and you want somebody to ping you who may not know you? How do you decide how to trust them? How do you stay anonymous so that they're kind of suggesting that they want to talk to you and you make the choice of if you talk to them or not? And so that deals with anonymity and privacy. And what kind of information? I mean, tacit knowledge systems, for instance, will mine everything that you're doing and present you, as the end user, with a list of all the stuff that you're supposed to know about. And if you've spent a bunch of time checking out, and I apologize, the Dodgers scores and the standings in the National League West, I will show up as an expert, or at least having an affinity with the Dodgers or with baseball. And I can probably tell you, how to find the standings at least, right? I don't want to tell the world that, I don't want that to show up in an expertise search, so I don't check that one off, right? And as you can imagine, based on what kind of content is on the internet, God only knows what you could end up on that list, and you want to keep that very close. These are the areas that we've identified as the key places that development work needs to happen. Collaborative components. Very clearly, we just put out a piece that said this was moving. This is an area that is moving toward a platform. I think we are going to see market consolidation. It's been around for quite some time, and I think we're going to end up with these three names being the dominant ones. You may question the third one, but they're making huge investments now to catch up, and they're in the process of releasing their second collaboration suite product. This list is not exhaustive. We are now talking about 50 companies that are in this pattern recognition / semantic analysis and other things. These have not been the focus of the conversation tonight, but I've touched on them. These are companies, identity management, universal repository, workflow, and rules and portals that are also going to impinge on this. This list is not based on the size of the company or anything else. It's kind of the goodness to fit to the idea of adaptive workspaces and the kind of investments we've seen these companies make. This list will shift constantly over the next several years. So let me take a little bit of a leap aside and talk about, I guess, somewhat to the point of what does this do in terms of leveraging the world. Because Howard Ringgold recently did a book, I don't know if any of you have seen Smart Mobs. I'll reference some of the ideas in there. That we identify reputation. And how do we use reputation when we're talking about a mobile, worldwide connected world, right? So I now have a reputation. One of the best reputation systems is on eBay. And you go to eBay and you really know if you want to do business with that person, right? Now if I go to Yahoo and I see somebody saying, hi, I want to join your, or MSN, I think I get more spam from MSN instant messaging, right? Hi, come and see my website. They usually give you some URL that tells them that you really don't want to go there, but they may invite you, and you don't trust that person, and therefore you decline them. But wouldn't it be nice if the reputation stuff was available to you, right? It wasn't just their profile, because the profile is something that you can make up. And as you know, people have various personas on the internet that are not necessarily related to who they really are. So they do have personal profiles. And then you have content, the stuff that you've created under your name. And you have interests that you have, and you have competencies that are expressed in that, because you may be writing or asking questions about something you don't know about, which shows an interest, and you have competencies based on your publishing, and other people are referencing your information. And then there's the trust piece, right? There's the piece of these people trust my reputation and trust me, and therefore that enhances my reputation. And the experience of others with me, right? So I have people who have explicitly said they trust me based on their affiliation with me, and then people who are expressing an opinion as well. And so when we talk about using reputation, we think that's going to be something that is going to be manifest in the consumer world prior to being shown in the commercial world, right? So we are seeing in Japan, for instance, bars where you have a little box that has a light on it, and that light represents your profile. If it's orange and the light's on, and mine's orange and the light's on, we might be a good match to talk to each other. Right? So it picks up profiles. We're going to see this stuff built into cell phones. And we're going to see all these kind of reputation things so that I can actually walk up and go, oh, let's see, I've got Bluetooth or some kind of proximity network, and I've never met you before, but 3 of my friends know you, right? So it's cross-reference. It's used the pattern recognition stuff, and it's cross-reference. 3 of my friends know you, and you seem to have a pretty good reputation with them, so you're somebody who's trustworthy to me, right? I trust them, they trust you, So those kinds of things are going to be using this kind of technology, I think, prior to some of the wide deployment in the enterprise. When we talked about smart mobs, or when I mentioned smart mobs, when you look at a crowd like this, think about these capabilities, and this is just a strange example, but think about these capabilities in terms of managing a large event, some kind of demonstration. I think Martin Sheen is probably down here someplace. And so you've got this you could think about this in the negative way of, let's all march down this street and raid all these stores, or you can say, this is a really boring march, and down the next block there's a chocolate store, and I notice on my phone that there are 10 or 20 of you that seem to like chocolate. I'm now anonymously pinging you, right? I'm sending out to the virtual chocolate list. Guys, why don't we go over to Rocky Mountain Chocolate Factory and grab a snack, because I'm bored with this thing. That kind of thing can happen, right? I mean, it's using these same kind of technologies, and we're seeing some of this happening in Scandinavia, in Japan, where they're using these kinds of technologies early on with some of the phone companies. And I think we're going to see more of this. So again, this was the good side of it. You can, of course, look at the negative side and the management of this crowd for whatever purpose it was originally doing. And it may be for good or ill. And so that's the mob. The other piece is trusting stuff based on physical location. So if I go to a restaurant, and again, I have my personal device of some sort, my friends have shown up. I'm now not talking about a person, I'm talking about a physical place. And it is going, oh look, my GPS says I'm here, this physical place is associated with this restaurant, and it's a trusted member list for Rasmus, 7 visits last year. For me, I'm on somebody else's list. I've been to this restaurant 7 times, I didn't leave, I ate dinner there. I may have even given some kind of explicit graffiti in cyberspace that's associated with this location that shows a positive reaction to the restaurant, and I can see that as I go to the restaurant, right? So I can pick up the trusted members of my community and their leavings in cyberspace related to different locations. So again, I think this is all related to clues in the environment, places that we can pick up stuff and use pattern recognition technology to do consumer kinds of things as well. So if we talk about this now from the vision standpoint, about the technology side, a couple things that I think we're going to start seeing, and I think we're going to see some rewrites when we talk about the file system. I think Microsoft is going to, as we go forward, they've been pretty explicit that the underlying data for Windows is going to be relational databases. Oracle's already done that with their collaboration suite and their universal file system. IBM is moving the same way with DB2 being the underpinnings of everything from the collaboration products to their content management products to everything else. But then we have the issue of this thing, right? So I write some information on here, and the enterprise doesn't know about this. Right? So I now have to synchronize this, and all this does right now is synchronizes a big blob called backup on my machine, or it puts a folder on there. The idea that I had earlier of content synchronization, right? So I may create something on here, I don't mark it private, it gets syndicated up to the network. And if we think about the reputations and other things of showing interest, sometimes it's just explicit lists, right? I have my list of, let's take music for instance. If I've got my metadata about the songs that I own, I'm not sharing and never have shared my music with anybody or downloaded anything. Anyway, but I have a list, right? The list is okay. I can share my list with you, right? So if you say, gee, I was listening to some music that in Dan's car the other day on a CD that he burned. Let me go look at his list and see what kind of groups he likes, right? And And so I'm increasing the reputation to some degree of those groups by me being affiliated with them. If you like the music you've heard in my car. And so, I can see these lists of, what are you reading, what kinds of content have you published, and other things as being part of the promotion of content. And I think this is where peer-to-peer comes in to some degree, is we're going to see a shift, and we can have a side conversation with the database folks on what this means in terms of peer-to-peer was originally brought in as a collaborative technology, right? That's really not where it's really distributed databases is what the underlying stuff is. It's the replication of information between databases. It's not the collaborative layer. Groove got a lot of peer-to-peer play because it created a collaboration platform on top of this replication model. But to me, the replication model is actually more important than the Groove implementation. And so I think we'll see systems replicating information and managing the pointers and relationships between different versions of content. And we'll end up with content caches and indexes and other things as we go forward that are going to start managing the content piece. And then we have the people issue, right? So I want to stay anonymous, and one of the examples is, Bill Gates walks into a room, and if he has reputation and his profile is online, he's broadcasting whatever his personal device says, and he walks into this room, and all of our alarms go up and say, if anybody famous shows up, give me an alert. Right? And we go, oh, Bill Gates is here. Oh, we all know what Bill looks like, and we all migrate to Bill. Right? Bill wants to be anonymous. Bill wants to walk into a room, and it may just say, software geek walks into a room. Right? I saw a great internal video from Microsoft recently. It was kind of their internal humor, but it was Bill Gates was being interviewed about the internet. And it started off with, says, Internet Pioneer. And then they shifted off to Mark Andreessen, and Bill was sitting there first, and he was saying, yeah, we understood the internet, and we were right there at the beginning. And then Andreessen was talking, and then they went back to Gates, and Gates says, yeah, we figured out the internet as soon as everybody else did. We were right there with them. And then it said Internet Pioneer, not. But if we think about, just walking in and having an anonymous thing, gee, there's somebody who knows something. They're not the richest man in the world. They're not the chief technical officer of Microsoft or the chairman of the board. They're just, an internet-savvy person that I can have a conversation with. Let me ping them and have that conversation and ask if they're willing to talk to me. So my dislikes, my likes, my preferences, and other things are going to manifest themselves through this anonymous profile. And then the trusted people, I may actually show up. One of the most powerful people at Microsoft is Bill Gates' speechwriter. If Bill is in a meeting or they walk into the Las Vegas Convention Center, Bill would probably like to know that his speechwriter is there, and they're going to show up on each other's device. They have a trusted relationship, and they're going to show up. Other people, as I just said, are not, right? So you may ping, and you may ignore a bunch of the stuff that comes at you. So this is the kind of environment we think is eventually going to move into the consumer world, but it's also going to very much impact what we do at the enterprise level. Finally, the economics of accidents. We've had several conversations with companies recently, both vendors and end users, who've asked us, build me a business case for knowledge management, build me a business case for collaboration. Most of the time the answer is you can't do it. There's no way to build a business case for horizontal, cross-functional collaboration because I don't have anything that I'm trying to solve in particular. Same thing with search engines, right? Build me a business case for search engines. You could argue that why should we do that because we didn't build a business case for the phone system and or for email, right? We also didn't build a business case for hiring employees. We just assumed we had to do that. But when we do something new, we say we want to build a business case. And right now it's collaboration, and to a lesser degree, it was more a couple of years ago, knowledge management. And we've decided that you really can't do that because what happens is you can't figure out what's going to happen in the future in terms of this. One of the people I was working with on that said, and you probably have a few science fiction fans in the audience, you need a mule to do that, right? So this is Isaac Asimov in the Foundation series. The mule could forecast the future through great mathematical acumen, right? We don't have that. So you have to take some of this based on faith almost. It's almost like a religious experience. I believe that if I get some good is going to come out of that. And that's really how most intranets were put in, because we didn't have a value proposition for the intranet as a whole. Now, if we were talking about project management and we decided that we had all these distributed projects where everybody had their individual files, and wouldn't it be great and couldn't we have efficiencies if we did projects better, and we can probably model that, we can build a business case for doing project management on an intranet. We can build a business case for putting intelligent content services into a call center. I can't build a business case for putting intelligent content services through the whole enterprise. So one of the ways that we started thinking about this was atoms running around in a vessel at sea level don't run into each other very often. It's kind of a steady state in here. But when you compress the stuff, they run into each other more often. And intelligent content services really compresses the environment that you're dealing with, right? The enterprise, and presents you with more opportunities than you would have to interact with people. And not only does it compress them, but it takes people with like profiles and throws them at each other almost, right? Here are opportunities for collaboration. I'm going to have more interactions, and they're going to be higher valued interactions. So this is a value proposition. Now, what I cannot do is figure out who's going to collaborate with whom, what they're going to collaborate about, or the magnitude of the interaction. So I still can't build a business case. Right? But I have a way of thinking about the problem that may convince me that there is value there. It's very difficult to do that. Yes?
Would there be a painless way after the fact to measure the impact?
Well, the analogy that I make in the piece that called the economics of accidents is neutrino astronomy. Mm-hmm. Okay, so neutrino astronomy has these great big vats of water looking for neutrinos to hit them, and they've got sensors around. Yes, we can build metrics looking for the positive stuff, right? We can look at a situation and say, what's important to the business is that we improve customer satisfaction. If I put this in, and I've got ways of measuring customer satisfaction, I can probably make some corollaries because I'm also collecting anecdotal evidence. And one of the other things that led to this, all the justifications that we see in the collaboration platforms are all historical. It's almost all anecdotal. When we get down to, as I said earlier, very specific business cases, I can build those, right? The scenario that I gave about call centers using pattern recognition to identify people who can help me solve a problem, I can build a business case with that with my eyes closed, right? And that's why almost all of these companies now are packaging up their technology and having a call center solution. Right? They're partnering with Siebel, they're partnering with Onyx, they're partnering with all these places and putting in solutions for call centers. Now they're scared because they don't want to become call center companies. They want to become this vision. They want to be horizontal platform players. But they can build a business case because we make them do that. Right? So one of the other jobs that I get to do is talk to executives and say, gee, be a little easier on these software companies. You've made all this investment in collaboration technology. You've connected people with email, real-time collaboration, e-learning, instant messaging, et cetera, and you haven't connected them with who they should talk to. They're talking to the same people they talked to before, they're just using a bunch of different channels to do that with. You have not expanded the scope of who they're collaborating with. That's what intelligent content services does. It gives you that ability to bring that scope in. Say, who in the enterprise? Be they in Brussels, and I'm in California, and the other person that I identify is in Singapore. We can see each other, we can make the choice. Now, this is the old leading the horse to the water, they don't have to drink thing, right? There's still a human choice of, am I going to jump into this collaboration and take advantage of the opportunity? But I can't, right? I see that opportunity, and we have seen, you know, millions of dollars in savings and millions of dollars in opportunities. So Siemens has a great story about, you know, a team in one part of the world is trying to make a contract. They said, oh my God, we don't know how to make this bid. It's, you know, we're one of two companies that's involved in this. We don't know. We're probably going to have to no bid this because our company can't do this. They use their internally developed system for collaboration and content discovery and found somebody in Norway that had done a very similar thing and said, oh, look, we do have this capability. And not only did they leverage the content, the proposal, but they also leveraged the expertise of the team. Never, without the intranet and without the appropriate tools for trying to identify that content, would they have ever found each other. It was just physically not possible. Yes?
Have you done much research in the area of communities of practice?
Yes.
Because what you're describing is that. And if I could just
Yep.
use this as a metaphor, this is basically enterprise, small business, executives, however you want to look at it, people with open minds and optimistic about these collaborations or these communities of practice and what they will yield if they just come together and open up.
Well, a community of practice, though, is much more formal than this. Right? So I'm usually not an advocate, although you would not know it from tonight's presentation, I'm not usually an advocate of technology being the solution to anything. Right? So I can have a community of practice without technology. Right? I've got another slide deck that talks about how to make communities of practice work. One of the slides in there is about a pharmaceutical company who was trying to figure out why chemists on drug development were having problems moving from project to project. And what they found out was they were putting blinders on, doing just the research that was going to help that drug development, and forgetting about everything else that happened in the world. They created a community of practice. Now, community of practice can be kind of mandated. We have a community of chemists. We think you guys should talk more so that you have better skills. And you should be, right, it's cultural. What's different between this and a community of practice, a community of practice is usually voluntary, doesn't necessarily have technology, may have some kind of forum, something, and it also has some kind of formal charter within the organization if it's a real community of practice. It has some mandate of these are the kinds of things that you have to develop. You may have training budgets associated with you. You may have content ownership associated with the community, because that's one of the questions we go to communities of practice all the time. Well, who owns this content? Well, it can't be Joe, because Joe might change jobs and get promoted or leave the company. It's much safer to have a community own some kind of process, procedure, or something else than an individual. What's different here is the technology is doing this kind of on the fly in an ad hoc way. A community of practice, I can say, I've got production engineers, I've got design engineers, Java programmers, I can create a community, here's a space, here's a budget, you guys go make yourselves better, and we'll help facilitate and train and all that kind of stuff, and we'll make you a good community. This is, I didn't know to ask the question before. Right? I'm now presented with something where I didn't know I couldn't create a community because I didn't know I was going to have this problem. Or it's something where I don't really have a skill base. It's not a skill-based question. Right, necessarily. It may be, not in a traditional sense of I've identified these skills and I put them into a skill matrix and decided this was a core competency of my organization. So again, I may not find them or have a community fostered for that. But through collateral discovery of what people talk about and what they publish, when I say this is what I'm looking for, the system may identify people who accidentally had that skill. I go out of my way to not tell people that I implemented MRP systems for 10 years. I don't want to do that anymore. But if you read my resume and you do pattern recognition and you say, I got a production inventory control problem and do we have a master scheduler? I was a master scheduler once. And I could probably help work through the American Production Inventory Control Society stuff with somebody and teach them how to be a master scheduler. Not on my skill profile, just collateral stuff. My publications show that, my resume shows that. So this can be used also, and this has been used by IBM Global Services, I know for a fact. They've used tacit knowledge systems to go out and not implement it as a way of connecting people in this way, which is what it was designed to do. They use it as a systems analysis tool. They run all the content, they look at the global capabilities of the company, they roll it up, and they say, what does the company know? And then they have the strategy guys going, what does the company need to know? Gee, look, there's a gap between what we know and what we need to know. And then they do a report with, that you could probably do on a recipe card that says, you guys need to know this stuff. You need to spend some money learning this because you know this, or you need to know this, and here's the stuff you don't know. So, yeah, I mean, you can use it as an analysis tool as well. But, it's really intended to be much more ad hoc. And I think with that, that's the last slide. And I've talked your ears off, and I appreciate your patience and the invitation. Hopefully it was somewhat useful, somewhat controversial, still to evolve. It does have rough edges on it. I think from the vision side, you can recognize capabilities that would be something that would be useful to you. My encouragement to you is if you do see that you work with your influencing within the industry and within your company to look at this as a problem that people start spending some money on, because if we keep doing what we're doing now, we're just going to have, Moore's Law is wonderful, and we're going to have better, faster, and cheaper computers all doing the same boring thing they're doing now. And I think they're quite a bit more capable than we're giving them the opportunity to be for us. So, Thank you very much.
Better than that, we'd like to recognize the effort people put forth coming
Yeah.
to us to award you this little plaque for
Well, thank you very
spending
much.
your time with us. We appreciate it very much. Thank you. I think it was really well received. There was a lot of interest evidenced by the questions, and I'm sure there'll be even more when they go back and review the slides later on. I'd like to open it right now to anyone who has any announcements they want to make. Did you want to make an announcement?
Yeah, I'm Eric Mott. I used to be a Sun strategist, and I launched a startup back in December, and we announced a product called Creator Base on July 1st. We partnered with Sun, Introspect Software, which is a collaboration knowledge management company, NTT Verio, VeriSign, PayPal. So we're delivering collaboration services to Soho, small business, researchers, students. So basically the little guy. All this stuff we saw, and by the way, there's a postcard here. I put some on the table as well. The stuff that we saw is primarily targeted at large enterprise. What I've done is ASP some of this more expensive stuff down to the small person. So feel free to take a look at our postcard. I can give you my business card. I'm offering free trials. Just write me a note. That's my announcement.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? I'll continue to make the offer. If some of you have special topics you would like to have covered in these meetings, let me know. As long as they're internet-centric, I'll be glad to put them on. My thanks to Dan for coming up from Southern California today, and we'll look forward to seeing you in August. Thanks so much.